Hi everyone, I'm Rob Shapiro from Fitchburg State University, and this is the BACB's 5th edition task list item G-21, Use Procedures to Promote Stimulus and Response Generalization. So let's talk about these two things, stimulus generalization and response generalization. Stimulus generalization is when a novel or untrained stimulus evokes behavior. And response generalization is when a novel or untrained behavior is evoked by a stimulus. So it's important to keep these straight. If you have one response evoked by one stimulus, let's say we've got that situation. We've got one response, it's evoked by one stimulus. And additional untrained stimuli evoke that response, it's stimulus generalization. New stimuli makes it stimulus generalization. Whereas if we have novel, untrained responses that are evoked by that same stimulus, then we've got response generalization. So if there are new responses, it's response generalization. Probably the easiest way to keep this straight is that if it's new stimuli, it's stimulus generalization. If it's new responses, it's response generalization. Generalization can occur across settings, so we might have the same behavior that starts to occur in different places. It can occur across people. We might have the same behavior that occurs when different people deliver a discriminative stimulus. It can occur across behaviors where we've got the same discriminative stimulus, but now different behaviors are occurring. Or it can occur across time, which is called maintenance. Behavior persists in the face of lack of reinforcement. And there are a number of strategies and tactics for promoting generalization. The first one is to train sufficient exemplars. And this can include stimulus and response examples, as well as negative examples, so things that it's not. And the bottom line is the more exemplars that we directly train, the more likely generalization is to occur. Right? So if we're trying to teach someone letter identification, right? And we've got them touching A, and we're only showing them one A, and it's Times New Roman 12 font in black. Okay? We don't know if we expose them to Times New Roman 12 font in red if they're going to be able to identify that as A, right? We don't know if it's an Arial or if it's in Garamond, if they're going to be able to identify that as A, right? So the more exemplars we train, the more likely generalization, some novel font that the person hasn't seen, that they're going to be able to label that as A, the more likely generalization is to occur. Second, we want to program common stimuli, and this is if we're looking for generalization across settings. And in doing this, we may want to incorporate features of the generalization setting into the training setting. So for example, if we're trying to teach someone how to be able to order food in a restaurant, but we're doing it in our clinic or in our school, the more we can have things that are common to that restaurant in our clinic or in our school, the more likely we are to get that generalization across settings. So doing things like having the booth set up the same way as in the restaurant that we're going to, having the color scheme be the same, having the waiter or waitress wearing a similar outfit to what the person's going to be wearing in the restaurant, right? All of these ways of programming common stimuli promote generalization. Next, we should look to train loosely. And training loosely involves randomly varying non-critical aspects of the instructional setting or procedure, both with and between sessions. So there are some elements of a discriminative stimulus that are required, that have to be what they are to get the response. But there's lots of things that are not, right? It could be the carrier words that we use around the discriminative stimulus. It could be the media in which the discriminative stimulus is presented. The language that we use, the inflection of our voice, who's delivering it. There are all these different things that are not critical to the SD. And the more we vary those things, the more likely generalization is to occur. Because let's be honest, if we only train something in one way, in a very tight way, that may be great for initial acquisition, but it's very unlikely that in the generalization environment or a generalization situation that someone's going to encounter that SD presented in the exact same way that we trained it, especially if we train it really tightly. So the more loosely we train, the more likely we are to get this generalization occurring. Other strategies include training to the level required for natural contingencies of reinforcement to be met. So we want to make sure that the latency, rate, duration, and intensity of responding is occurring to a degree that it will meet naturally occurring reinforcement. So for example, if we're looking for someone, if we're trying to improve someone's social skills and we're looking for them to say hi when someone else says hi to them, okay? And so what do? We say hi and someone says hi back and we provide some kind of reinforcement, okay? That's great. But we need to think about what has to happen with that hi that's coming back for natural reinforcement to be delivered. Well, it probably has to happen pretty quickly after the first person says hi, right? So we may not want to have it be that we say hi and it takes the person 15 seconds to say hi back, because that's probably not going to work in the natural environment. We need their hi back to come really quickly after we deliver ours, okay? That speaks to latency. The second one, just thinking about intensity in that case. Let's say that we say hi and the person says it really quietly. They definitely said it, but it happened so quietly that in a typical natural environment, like let's say a cafeteria, there's no way that a listener is going to have heard that hi back. When we may need to train it to a sufficient volume or sufficient intensity that it's likely to be heard by a person in the natural environment for reinforcement to be able to be delivered. Next, we want to program indiscriminable contingencies. And that's a big word, indiscriminable, that you're probably not going to hear in any other context than right here. But really the root of that word is that discriminate. So indiscriminable contingencies means that the learner can't discriminate whether the next response will yield reinforcement. And this more closely mimics the generalization or natural environment. So if we think about this, if we're delivering reinforcement on an FR1 schedule, fixed ratio 1, or continuous reinforcement, that is not an indiscriminable contingency, because in that case, the learner knows that every single response is going to get reinforcement, right? So then when that learner gets out into the generalization environment and not every response generates reinforcement, that behavior is not likely to persist. Whereas if in the training environment we fade that reinforcement to some kind of a variable ratio, and the larger we make that variable ratio, now we're getting towards an indiscriminable contingency. The learner can't discriminate whether reinforcement is coming for the next correct response. And because we do that, when reinforcement doesn't occur every single time in the generalization environment, that's okay. The learner is likely to persist and will be able to more likely contact reinforcement at the natural schedule within which it's occurring. Some additional strategies and tactics for promoting generalization can include mediating generalization. And this can be arranging for something or someone to ensure the transfer of the target behavior. And this can be contrived, or it can be a tool or skill that the person is taught, such as self-management strategies. So if we go back to our example of trying to teach someone to be able to order from a restaurant, so we can do that in our clinic or in our school, and we can have them trying to be able to order off of a menu, and we have some menu that we made up. But we might have more luck if we go to the actual restaurant that they're going to go to and we borrow a menu that they're actually going to have and have them practice ordering off of that menu, okay? Now, when they get into the generalization environment, we've mediated generalization. They have that actual menu that they've used to learn how to order from. And so by taking this item into the actual environment, they're more likely to engage in that behavior in the generalization environment. And then finally, there's this concept of training to generalize, which is basically reinforcing variability in responding. And we can also explicitly instruct the learner to generalize. So this training to generalize is really getting at the heart of response generalization, which would be multiple untrained responses to a novel stimulus, right? And this might be a situation where, let's say that we're working with a learner on our social skills and we say hi to them and we want them to say hi back. Well, maybe we want them to do more than say hi back. Maybe we want them to sometimes say hi, sometimes say hello, sometimes give a little wave, sometimes say, how's it going, right? Well, we might be able to train to generalize by instructing that when I say hi to you, I'm only going to provide reinforcement if you greet me back in a way different than the last time you greeted me. So if I say hi and they say hi, that's great. Reinforcement is delivered. But now the next time I say hi, they say hi, no reinforcement is delivered because it was the same thing. There was no variability there. But if they said hi the first time and they say, how's it going the second time? Now that gets reinforced, okay? Because we're reinforcing that variability in responding. So it's not just reinforcing a specific behavior, but it's specifically reinforcing variability to try to get that response generalization. So finally, some guiding principles when we're looking to promote generalization in general. The first is, if we can, let's minimize the need for generalization as much as possible. When we can, let's teach directly so we don't have to rely on generalization. An example of this that I think about is that sometimes when we're teaching money skills, we go to the store or we order online sets of fake money. Fake plastic nickels and quarters and paper dollar bills. Why would we do that when we could actually use real nickels and quarters and dollar bills to teach money skills? Because now we don't have to generalize from the fake stuff to the real stuff. We also want to conduct generalization probes before, during, and after instruction so we can assess if and when generalization has occurred. We do it before because maybe we don't even need to train for generalization because maybe we've already got generalization. But certainly as instruction is progressing, we want to assess whether generalization has occurred so we know that it's happening. We want to involve significant others when possible because the more people that are involved, the higher the likelihood of success, right? We have more people delivering discriminative stimuli. We have more people delivering reinforcement in the natural environment. So it makes it more likely we're going to end up getting that generalization. As with any behavior change procedure, we want to use the least intrusive, least costly tactics possible because it's less restrictive, more efficient, and then ultimately easier to withdraw. And as much as possible, we want to contrive our intervention tactics as needed and basically make a plan for generalization at the outset. The bottom line is it's always critical to remember that while we may teach things in a highly contrived environment, right, a highly controlled environment, because that may be what's indicated to get that initial acquisition. At the end of the day, if the only time someone can engage in a response is in a highly controlled, highly contrived environment, so what? It fails the so what tests. The goal of teaching is so that that behavior can be generative and we can see it happening in different environments and different situations where it's actually going to be meaningful and be socially significant for our learners. So right at the outset, we need to have a plan for generalization.